I'm Randy Gariss, and welcome to session number 2, and actually part number 2. Session 1 and session 2 have to be woven together on this issue of emotional maturity. I'm pretty confident that the most painful thing that you deal with within the church life and kingdom life is when there's a disconnect between somebody that appears to have spiritual maturity but not emotional maturity. We said in the first session, it's not possible to be spiritually mature and not be emotionally mature as well, because that's just the very definition of it. But you run into it a lot. I'm going to guess if you've gotten frustrated and even left a ministry, or you've gotten frustrated and wanted to change a church, or you got frustrated and wanted to change a group, or whatever you were dealing with, my guess is it's this: that inconsistency of, the anger, the hurt, the shaming, the what emotional maturity is a part of spiritual maturity. They have to be together. We talked in the first session the beginning of why they might be disconnected in the Western church, and we're starting the discussion about where we go. But we have to go a little further. There's a second part to this diagram, and I know it's not great, and nobody's ever going to ask me to be their art teacher, but we transfer the emotions we don't understand, the ones we've never unpacked out of our box and taken to the Lord and the Lord's people. We transfer them not only to the permissible ones, but we transfer them to something physical. We transfer them to something physical. You go, what? The part of the emotions that are never taken to the Lord and the Lord's people and put back in healed ways are transferred to something physical. Well, why would we do that? Because that's what we learn to do as children. I want you to take a 4-year-old in your mind, and I want you to drive into Walmart, a 4-year-old that knows you and very well. And you drive into Walmart, and that little 4-year-old's box begins to fire like crazy. I mean, they begin to have longing and joy and anticipation. They begin to have excitement about what they're going to get. They have a sense of all the emotions of excitement. And then you turn to them before you get them out of the car seat, and you say, now we're going in, and we're going to get motor oil and dishwashing soap and no toy and no candy. Well, as soon as you do that, that little boy's box begins to fire with a different set of emotions. It begins to fire with sadness and disappointment, begins to fire with anger because you took his brother to Walmart yesterday and he got something and that's not fair. And this little boy's box begins to fire with all these emotions up here. Now, in a perfect world, that child would turn to you and say, I'm feeling sadness, I'm feeling disappointment, I'm feeling some anger. But you and I both know that child's not going to do that. Why? Because he doesn't know how to even articulate what he's feeling. All he knows is his box is beginning to fire. And he feels a pressure building up. And he's upset, but he doesn't even know how to articulate it. So what's he do? He transfers it to something physical. You notice the lip come out. He begins to scuff his boots as he walks into Walmart. And as you go into Walmart, because everything's at eye level with him, you say to him 90 times, no, put that back, no, put that back. And every time as you're doing that, this little boy's box begins to fire. So what's he do with a box that begins to fire with all of its motors, but he doesn't know what to do about it, and he doesn't know how to take it to the Lord and the Lord's people? Here's what he'll do, and you use your imagination. He'll throw a hissy fit. You've seen it at stores somewhere. And the little kid begins to throw a crying jag, and he throws himself on the floor, and he just begins to come apart. Now, somebody who's not very aware would say, well, he's working you. Well, he may be working you, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is the pressure built up on the box. He didn't know what to do with the emotions, and in some crazy, broken, dysfunctional way. It didn't work, but in a dysfunctional way it worked. In some crazy way, that dysfunction caused the pressure to come off of that box, and he cried it out. Now, it didn't work. It was dysfunctional. It got him in trouble back when he got back to the car. We had a discussion about being a little boy and not a big boy, and so more shame came with it. But in some crazy, odd, dysfunctional way, it worked. So why is the little 14-year-old girl who just lives down there, why is she a cutter? Well, the problem is razor blades and bathroom doors and no. She's got a box, and that box is firing like crazy, and And either nobody has taught her or she didn't believe it or something, but she's never learned to unpack that box and take it to the Lord and the Lord's people. And so as the box builds up pressure in some crazy way, the problem is not razor blades or bathroom doors. The problem is she didn't know what to do with it. So she transfers to something physical, and she takes a razor blade and she goes a little here or under her leg, and the sting and the little bit of blood, it's dysfunctional. It doesn't work. It brings her more shame. It brings her a more endorsement of her own worthlessness. But in some crazy dysfunctional way, it worked for a moment at least. It let the pressure off. And you say, well, we're going to solve it with, no, you got to help her unpack the box. Maybe she doesn't feel pretty enough, skinny enough, talented enough, well-liked enough. I don't know what it is. Maybe everybody tells her she's all of those things, but she feels like a bird on a high wire, the one mistake and I'm done. And she begins to feel all of this pressure, but she doesn't know what to do with it. She transfers something physical. I want to be careful with these illustrations. I know I can hurt somebody, but I don't know how else to describe this. So why is the person who's obsessed with food and for whom food has actually become a bit of an enemy? Why are they that way? You visit to the guy and you say, why does that happen? And he says, I don't know. I guess I just like pie better than other people. No, you don't like pie better than other people. Everybody likes pie. But the problem is somewhere in your growing up years, that box became there and you didn't know how to have joy and celebrate with people and you didn't know how to do some of the things that would occur and you didn't know what to do with your sense of failure on occasions or shame or disappointment or sadness or all the kinds of things that occur in a normal human heart and normally just should be unpacked bit by bit and but somehow a piece of pie helped you celebrate. And somehow a piece of pie is somehow comfort food when I feel like everything's going wrong, or when apathy takes over and I just don't care, that numbing emotion I said in the last session, kind of like morphine. No, the problem's not a pie. The problem is a box. I may really get beat up for this one of these days, and I mean this sincerely. Go to any gym in America, and there will be, and again, you got to be selective on this. I understand. I'm not making a blanket statement. That's just not true. But there'll be an individual or 4 individuals or 15 individuals that are working out, and they have to work out 2.5 hours a day. And again, nothing magical on that. I have no problem if somebody has a particular goal they're going. I get that. But they're working out 2.5 hours a day, and you go, why do you work out 2.5 hours a day? And they go, because I have to. I just don't feel right if I don't do it, and I have to do this. And so they're pushing weights, and they're using bands, and they're doing all the things that they do. And you ask them, why? I just feel better when I do this. And I'm not trying to be as insulting as it sounds. But if you actually have a conversation, what you often find is I have an individual who doesn't feel good about their relationship with their ex-wife, and they don't connect well with their 13-year-old son, and they don't like their job, or maybe everybody tells them they're successful and they're a type A-driven individual, but they feel so emotionally disconnected from people, and I have to achieve, and in some crazy way, working out 2.5 hours a day, in some way it works. They've transferred it to something physical. I don't know who is watching this and participating, but I'm pretty confident that I can talk to somebody who's a 19-year-old boy and you have porn in your life. And I say to you, why is porn part of your life? You say you hate it, you say you don't want it, but why is porn? And the answer is, well, I guess I'm just lusty than other people. No, you're not. No, everybody battles lust. And you might even say, well, I'm addicted to it. And that could be a whole nother discussion. But I'm going to go, no, that word addiction doesn't explain anything. Honestly, it just means you keep going back to it. Truth is, what actually happened is when you were first introduced to porn, it was liberating and freeing and power. I'm not tied to mama's apron strings and a whole new world. But that isn't why you keep going back to porn. No. Truth is, you use porn on your discouragement days. You do the days that you don't feel anything, that you're numb. You use porn when you're mad. You use porn when you're sad. Porn is not particularly a lust issue anymore. I've transferred the emotions I don't understand. You want to help somebody actually get over porn or anything else. It's the rest of the box you begin to unpack. Maybe you get the gist so far. But I need to add something else into it, and I need you to be patient with me. Give me a couple of minutes before this makes sense to you. You see, there's an odd phrase in the Old Testament that used to baffle me. And I'm using it more as a metaphor, I know that, but it's a phrase that baffled me. What it was is, in the Old Testament, I recognized that there's a phrase about a hill behind people's houses where they had a Baal and an Asherah. I'm just going to put that. A Baal and an Asherah. A Baal and an Asherah were two false gods. They were very sensual gods. And I'm not shocked that the Baal and the Asherah exist in the Old Testament when you have people like Ahab and Jezebel. They were pagan people. For them to have a Baal and an Asherah on the hill behind their house, that didn't surprise me. But what does surprise me is that when it shows up repeatedly in the Old Testament that a prophet of God had to go destroy the Baal and the Asherah, or maybe the people of God who repented but they did not destroy their Baal and the Asherah, or maybe it's a king who did many good things but not the Baal and the Asherah, and you're going, what in the world is happening here? It's pretty simple. There are some things, they had the Lord, they had the Lord's people, they had the tabernacle or the temple, depending on when we're talking about. And they took things, but there's some things I don't know how to take to the Lord and the Lord's people. And so what they did is they built a little back door out their path, out of their house that they used at night. And they used the little back path to go to the Baal and the Asherah, because somehow there's some things I know how to take to the Lord and the Lord's people. And there's some things I transfer it to something else. And you go, what in the world are you talking about, Randy? That Baal and Asherah will never be your healing. That Baal and Asherah will never be your healing. The Baal and the Asherah that Christian people have often done is a little back path that when your wife's not home, you find the computer. The little Baal and the Asherah is when nobody's looking. And every now and then, the drink. You could just move into something physical. That Baal and Asherah, this is really important you understand this. It can be negative. You go, well, duh, I guess it is. My cousin Ronnie has since gone to the Lord, but my cousin Ronnie is an alcoholic. He says he was only drunk one time. It just lasted 25 years. Ronnie quit drinking, and Ronnie absolutely changed after 25 years of drinking, and I'm so proud of Ronnie. But Ronnie didn't learn to drink because Ronnie loved the taste of alcohol. Ronnie learned to drink because he was a little boy whose dad was in and out of prison. And Ronnie grew up with a box he didn't know what to do with. And alcohol became the Baal and the Asherah that some crazy way, as destructive as it was. That Baal and Asherah can be negative. Alcohol. It's the marijuana that you have to have every now and then because your nerves just can't handle it. It becomes a part of a crutch of your life. You've transferred to something physical. The Baal and the Asherah, though, doesn't have to be negative. The Baal and the Asherah can be neutral. It's not illegal to go lift weights for 2.5 hours. No police officer are going to pull you over and go, well, that was excessive. No, it's neutral. It doesn't harm. It's not illegal. You're certainly welcome to do that. Maybe the best illustration I know is I have a good friend by the name of Tom. Tom was an absolute wreck of a life. He would tell you that if he were standing here. Had addictive personality on so many things. He lived with so much brokenness. Tom was charismatic. He could, as the old phrase goes, he could sell ice to an Eskimo. He was incredibly charismatic and broken. His life just a mess. And he came to Christ, and he really came to Christ, and he came hard to Christ. And immediately Tom moved from the negative, and Tom moved and immediately became a runner. Not just a runner, he became an ultra marathon runner, running 50, 60, 90-mile races. Why? Because he knew to honor Christ, He couldn't keep doing the things that he'd been doing with alcohol and drugs and women. But he didn't know what to do with the box, and nothing against Tom. It just took time for him to unpack that. And while he was waiting for time, running became his obsession. It's just moving to something physical. By the way, you'll like where this story goes here in a second. And I'm not even bothered that he did that. He did what he knew to do as he was working through the sequence. Your Baal and Asherah can be negative. It can be neutral. And here's where we start to get into your kitchen. It can be positive. What do you mean by that? It's very possible that you didn't know what to do with the box you have. And you have emotions you don't know what to do. And I'm going to use some church illustrations, but I could make it on anything. But somehow you felt better about yourself when you would go preach. Somehow when I preach, I just felt better, and I knew I was honoring the Lord, and I knew I was doing what the Lord wanted me to do, and so preaching is what I did to feel better. And the answer is no, you're wrong. Truth is, preaching was never your healing, and it was never your healer. God is your healer, and God's people are your healer, and you used preaching as a cheap substitute, and it can never heal you. And you got stuck emotionally. Yes, you knew more Bible. Yes, you could communicate well, but your emotions never got well because you were running from God to preaching. And you say, well, no, I wasn't. Yes, I promise you. I've watched it over and over and over again. Where the very thing we say we're doing for the Lord, the truth is we're doing it to the Lord. The Lord is your healer. The Lord's people are your healing, and your preaching will never be it. It's the young man or young woman who, when they lead worship, somehow I feel better about myself. If I can just lead worship, somehow it seems like my problems go away a little more. It feels like I'm just better, and people applaud me when I do that, and I get more kudos when I do it. And so leading worship is so healing to me. And the Lord would say, no, you're using God against God. God's appeal is, come to me, I'm your healer. Come to me and God's people. We're going to open that box this direction, but you can become proficient at these. I grew up in a family that was a great family, but we probably weren't a family that unpacked the box real well. I actually would say I probably only had 4 or 5 emotions, and I mean that. That's all I thought I had. When my wife married me, in some crazy way, she would want to come and hear me preach for many reasons, but one of them was this, is that she often got more of my heart in my actual preaching. Somehow I could be more transparent than probably even living with me. And somewhere along the line, I'm one of those guys that looked up one day and went, wait a second. I think my preaching, I've been using instead of this. This concept, I think, is really pretty essential that you do some self-evaluation. What are you running to? What are you getting applause for? What becomes your marker in life? How many women at the school just, boy, they wish they were you, and you use all your time at the school, but the truth is, you've never gone to where the healer is. On Tom moved and he's running over here. Oh, what do you mean? Oh, Tom still likes to run, and Tom still runs, maybe not the ultra marathon anymore, but he still likes it. But the crazy thing is, if you ask Tom, what's your healer? He would say the Lord and the Lord's people. And running is part of his act of worship. Running is part of what he does because of his delight in how God made him. But he would tell you, if I never ran another step again, I would be perfectly fine. I'd be perfectly fine. My running is not my healing. My God and God's people are my healing. For me, I think I moved my preaching over here. I enjoy preaching and I enjoy kingdom leadership and the things that I get to do. It's an absolute privilege. But I'm going to tell you right now, if I lost my voice and could never speak again, I'm fine. because I know who my healer is. The Lord and the Lord's people are my healing. Preaching is something I get to do as an act of worship to the Lord, but if I never get to do it again, I'm fine. Absolutely fine. In fact, when it was over here and I had a failed sermon, I joke, for years, I preached 5 times on Sunday morning. You think about, it takes a lot of courage to preach a bad sermon 5 times in a row. For years. But if I had a bad sermon where I embarrassed myself, which I mentioned, earlier, is that's one of the weaknesses that I used to have to work through. Man, I couldn't wait till Sunday came back again because I got to get back over here so I can feel better about myself. Truth is, a bad sermon, I feel bad about it because I don't want to handicap God's people, and I'm sorry about that. But the truth is, I really am fine because my preaching, well, the Lord would say this, Randy, I loved you in the nursery when you didn't know your name, and I will love you when you're in the nursing home and can't remember your name, and your preaching doesn't change 1 ounce. And preaching becomes an act of worship, not my healer. I don't know what your story is. I wish we could sit down over a cup of coffee and talk about this. But here's what I do know. I know the reason there's a disconnect between individuals who seem to have spiritual maturity but lack emotional maturity is that there's been too long a Baal and an Asherah, either negative or neutral or positive. There's been a substitute for this. So what do? We figure out how to take this to the Lord and Lord's people. The rest of this series will simply begin to build on this framework of how do we become emotionally healthy and well. 1 Thessalonians 5:23, Himself, God Himself, the God of peace, may He sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be found sound and blameless at the coming of the Lord Jesus. And He who calls you is faithful, and He will do it. God bless.